Our next speaker is Duncan, and I first knew Duncan as the top-tier host of a brunch that I have ever been to. This guy cooked an unbelievable amount of food, brought it all himself. Yeah, thank you for the brunch, Duncan. But he's not here. He's not here to talk about the brunch. What's really impressive, besides the brunch, what's really impressive is he jumped into tech a few years ago, and since then it's been from web scrapers all the way down to embedded Rust frameworks. He's fluent in JavaScript, Python, Go, Rust, and he is here to talk to us about embedded systems. So please give it up for Duncan.
Thanks, man.
You got it.
What's up? How we doing? My name is Duncan Lutz. As he said, I'm a software engineer. I've been writing software for about 4 years now. Just wanted to say a quick thank you to Big Sky. It's my first conference talk, and depending how bad this goes, it may be my last conference talk. We're going to find out together. A little bit about me. Like he said, I've worked in a lot of different areas, a lot of different technologies, even though I've only been doing this a short amount of time. Right now I do mobile as my day job. I did a lot of web scraping, a lot of data processing, things like that. If you can't tell by the photos, I do make a little music, so I actually don't play the bagpipes. I own those bagpipes, but I don't know how to play the bagpipes, so you can check out my guitar music. It's way better than my bagpipe music. At that link if you're interested. I'm a very serious person, and I take the opportunity to talk to you today very seriously. And thus, I spent a lot of time thinking about what I should talk about today. I needed it to be relatable. I needed it to apply to your daily life, something you could take back from the conference, not another dumb talk that you watched and ignored and then went to the bar after. And after about a month of thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I came upon what I thought was an appropriate topic: potato guns. If you're not familiar with potato guns, what are you doing? But I do have a definition. A potato gun is a type of pipe-based cannon that you use combustible, flammable gas or air pressure in order to launch a projectile. It's usually a potato. It's in the name. To simplify, big tube thing, make potato go whoosh with air or boom with fire. I didn't write that, AI wrote that. I'm not that creative, I'm not Carson. So how do potato guns fit into a tech conference? Well, like Ken, I've been getting interested in embedded programming recently. I think you always need to be expanding what you're working on. I think that the moment that you settle, you start to diminish your abilities, and so I try to learn as much as I can. This particular potato gun is actually, it's built with an Arduino embedded stuff in Rust. So we're not just making potato guns here, I promise. Although we are making potato guns. All right, so why a potato gun? Well, to answer that question, I've got to introduce you to somebody. This is my dad. My dad likes to blow shit up. He told me to say that. He was like, "Is it going to be really cool? You need to say that." Throughout my childhood, we built a lot of potato guns, and that's kind of a weirdly, oddly specific thing to do, but we have done it a fair amount. We even did it semi-recently. Back in 2020, we built, this was a toilet paper launcher so you could deliver toilet paper to your loved ones during the lockdown. We called it the Toilet Paper Ranged Delivery System, or TURDS for short. That's on YouTube too, if you're interested. So a better question, why Rust? Well, for one, my wife likes the little crab guy. That's what she calls him. That's how she knows him. It's the only thing she knows about Rust. But for two, I like Rust. For a few years, I was that guy who was like, well, have you considered rewriting your potato gun in Rust? The other thing is that I knew already that there was a number of different tools that allowed you to run Rust on an Arduino. I've written C. I know C decently well, but I know Rust a lot better. So we're doing Rust. So here's a disclaimer, because I don't want you to sue me. This is dangerous, and you can actually hurt somebody, and you probably shouldn't do it. But if you're going to do it, you should make sure that you're using materials that are rated for the pressure that you're using. Always point it in a safe direction. Don't point it at people. It's a real gun. You could kill somebody. After all that boring stuff, let's get on to the cool stuff. This is a traditional layout, what I would call traditional as I knew it, of a potato gun. This design has two chambers. It has the barrel and the ignition chamber. The barrel, basically, it just holds a potato. There's not a whole lot going on. So we're mostly going to focus on what's going on in the ignition chamber. Everything here is the cool stuff. So we've got a removable cap at the back. This is where we add the air-soluble gas. That's probably not the right word. It's where we put hairspray. In our case, we use hairspray. And in order to ignite the gas, we use a grill igniter. It's basically a little button. It's got a couple wires that come out of it. And we put some screws. Those are supposed to be screws. Screws are surprisingly hard to draw. We put some screws through it that are close enough that a spark can jump across, but not so close that they're touching. And that spark is what ends up igniting the hairspray that we threw in there. So let's walk through firing this design real quick. First, we're going to load a potato with a ramrod into the barrel. Then we're going to remove the end cap from the ignition chamber. We're going to spray in hairspray, an appropriate amount. What that is, there's no good measurable. It's usually like 6 seconds. You usually go 1, 2, and you're good. After we've got that hairspray in there, we put the cap back on. You point it in a good direction, and you hit the button, which puts a shock through the chamber, and it launches the potato gun out of the chamber. And then your neighbor gets really mad at you because you did hit her house. You weren't thinking that much about it. So I didn't go with this design. This was the traditional design, and why didn't I go with it? The reason for that is it's mostly flammable gas. I didn't really want to have my first embedded project have the opportunity to explode. And also there was some complications around, like, how do you dispense hairspray? You know, you could think of some things, but I ended up going with the other option that we talked about earlier, which was air pressure, pneumatics. Dispensing hairspray, like I said, from a can into a chamber, it's not a very common problem. Maybe one of you in here has thought about it, and I would be surprised. But moving air from one place to another is a very common problem. It's something that you have to do a lot. And so even though there were a number of problems that we're going to talk about at the end of this thing, I decided that this was probably an acceptable problem that I could solve. And I started laying out my design. So my thing is a lot more conceptual than Ken's cool pictures. But this is the circuit layout for my potato gun. This is all the wiring, and it's a lot of stuff. And it took a long time to design. I spent about a month doing research and trying to figure this stuff out. I'd never done any electronics work in my life. Maybe like putting in an outlet in my house, or maybe a switch. But let's break it down. It's actually pretty simple, even though it's kind of scary looking. So in terms of materials, what we're going to build it out of, originally in the traditional design, we would use something called ABS. I don't know what it stands for. I see it at Lowe's when I go there. Normally, with the hairspray design, there's almost no pressure being exerted on that because it's momentary. It's momentary. The gas ignites, it shoots the potato gun out, you're done. In terms of air pressure, you've got to be a little bit more concerned about that, because if I'm putting a tube under 80 psi, it will explode. And I think that that's an embarrassing hospital visit. I've had some embarrassing hospital visits, but potato gun accident is not one that I want to tell to the emergency room worker. So I say that. I ended up opting for something called Schedule 40 PVC, and it's technically rated up to about 220 PSI. What I didn't learn is that air pressure and water pressure are different. So nothing exploded. I'll be upfront. Nothing exploded, but you shouldn't use Schedule 40 PVC because about 50 people on Reddit told me that I was going to die from shrapnel. Yeah, I'd spent too much money on PVC, so I committed to it. I figured I would hide behind a tree or something when I was shooting it, and that would be good enough. Let's talk about microcontrollers. I didn't know anything about embedded programming, like I said earlier, but I did know about microcontrollers. A microcontroller is essentially just a small computer. It's got programmable inputs and outputs. There's a wide variety of microcontrollers available. A lot of them are really small, and they're meant for less generic work. These are kind of specialized for hobby programming. But I ended up going with this Arduino Uno because, well, like I said earlier, I knew I could run Rust on it, and it's like $25 for this thing. It's pretty accessible. The microcontroller's job is just to communicate with electronic components using GPIO, general purpose input-output pins and analog pins, and there will be a test at the end of this. GPIO pins operate like an electronic switch, and it can be set to either high or low. You're putting information in or you're putting information out. I say information. Usually it's just a straight voltage. Analog pins work a little bit different because they're just reading a voltage in, and that's helpful in specific situations. We're going to talk about one example today, but let's talk about GPIO first. Here's an example of interacting with the GPIO pins using, it's called AVR-HAL, AVR-HAL. AVR is the family of microcontroller that the Arduino is, and HAL stands for, let's read my notes here, hardware abstraction layer. We got there. In this example, all we're literally doing is we're grabbing pin 13, one of those pins we were looking at earlier. And GPIO, you have to specify whether it's an input or output. You can change it as you go if you're communicating back and forth with the system, but it has to be one or the other. And so we're declaring it as an output, and we are just writing high and low to pin 13 on 100 millisecond delays. What this is doing on an Arduino, pin 13 is also wired up to a little LED on the board, and so your board will start blinking at you. And then you go and get your wife, and you're like, look, the pin's flashing. And that's great, honey. And she goes back to reading her books. So next up, we got valves. This is one of those things, again, that I don't know how you did it, Ken, but like researching some of this stuff was kind of weird. You know, when you get into programming, you're not exactly sure where to look for things, and maybe you find tutorials that fit a specific problem that you're trying to solve. Nobody made a Arduino potato gun microcontroller tutorial on YouTube. At least I haven't made it yet, you know what I mean? And so we ended up going with sprinkler valves, which in theory would work for air pressure. I say in theory. Again, we're going to cover these things in a bit. They're really accessible. You can pick them up at the hardware store, and they're like $20. So you can get rolling, and it works with PVC too. It's got a 3/4 inch female end for PVC on there. So that brought me to the next roadblock, which again, so Ken kind of brushed over this. I'd never done any electronics, and I thought, how do I get 24 volts into my valves when I've got a 9-volt power supply for my Arduino, or I've got 5 volts coming out of the Arduino? And the solution for that is relays. So this was probably my favorite thing to learn, which is a really nerdy thing to say. My wife will judge me later when she tells me that, or when I tell her that. But I think relays are really cool. They essentially act, well, they're literally a electronic switch. So the way that it works is they've got an electromagnet that is hooked up to your input. And so when the Arduino or whatever you're using sends 5 volts into the relay, it will start up the electromagnet, and it literally moves that little switch physically into place. And that makes a connection, and it starts to let power through. So the idea is I have 2 separate systems. One of them is our output current. So in our case, 24 volts. I want to be able to control the valves with them. And we have an input of only 5 volts, but we get to amplify that to whatever we want. It could be 200 volts. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I didn't have anything else to say. Yeah, it was the most engineer-y thing I got to do. Once I understood relays. Now again, we've got relays. We got power up there. Now we can move. I left the relay graphic up there. That's why I'm confused. Relays and microcontrollers are cool, but unless we have power, we can't actually run the thing. So there's a lot of different options when you're working with microcontrollers on how to power a thing. If it's going to be static somewhere, you can plug it into the wall. If you're doing development, the USB cable will actually just power your microcontroller, but that wasn't really, that wouldn't work with a potato gun. I needed it to be independent. And so what I ended up opting for was just batteries. And I had a 9-volt and a 24-volt battery, or 24 volts. It was actually 2 12 volts in series. That doesn't matter. Like 3 of you were like, sweet. So Ken had talked about taking a 24 or a 12 volt down to 5 volts, and that was something I considered. There are methods in order to actually lower your voltage, but it was a little too complicated and expensive for how much I wanted to do for this project. So instead, I just got 2 battery packs, and I had 12 volt batteries and 9 volt batteries in the same thing. I'm not selling it to people. What does it matter? You know what I mean? So the last component is super simple, but it is important, and it's just an LCD module. These things are great. They are really annoying to work with because they have so many pins. And I spent about 3 hours one day soldering pins together. But it's super valuable because you can look at debug information and information about, in our case, like what pressure we're at right now. When you're not connected to a serial port, you really have no idea what your little embedded device is doing, your microcontroller. So being able to display something is very useful. So now we're back to the circuit. It's a little bit less scary maybe now. Maybe not. I don't know. It probably wouldn't have been less scary to me, if I'm honest. But the wiring helps with the complexity. I actually understand what all of it's doing now, where I wouldn't have 2 months ago, which feels very good. But yeah, so here's the real question. Did it work? No. It didn't work. So why would I give the talk then if the potato gun didn't work? I hear you asking. In my like I said, in my short career, I've done a lot of different things. I went from not knowing any programming to working on large-scale systems within about 2 years. And how did I do that? A lot of it had to just do with learning and experimenting with different things and trying out different technologies and learning different languages and all the nerdy stuff that you don't really want to do when you just write React for your day job. I don't want to learn Go. Why would I? And this is the reason is I failed at this. It didn't work, and we're going to talk about what didn't work. But fundamentally, I understand a little bit more about electricity now. I have a Rolodex of electrical components, a lot of extra electrical components sitting in my small office now. I got like 3 boxes of assorted buttons and wires and stuff that I can play with. And when you go and learn these things, it doesn't just stop at a potato gun that failed to shoot any potatoes. You you glean a little information, and I think that's really how you move forward in your career, advance your skills, and just get better at things generally. So what went wrong? Well, first, crappy relays. Relays need to be separated from their input circuit and their output circuit, and if they're not, then things get screwy. The relays that I bought off Amazon seemed to not be separated. So when I would hit my button and I would activate my valves, it would work, but all of a sudden my Arduino would start to crap out. It would do random things. It would restart. And only after a lot of voltage testing and things, that's the conclusion I came to. The other thing is valves. So don't trust me when I say that sprinkler valves will work with air pressure. They don't, and they break the first time you try to do it. I think that they're rated for something like 50 PSI. I put 20 PSI through the things, and they stayed open forever. So don't do that. You should do something like this. You should fail and do it again, and that's how this works. I've got a number of other project ideas. I'm probably going to complete this stupid potato gun idea. I say probably. I've got a number of ideas around aiming and other ridiculous things that I'm going to add to it. I want to mount it in the back of my dad's truck and shoot something while we're moving. We got plans. But you should do something like this too, because you're going to fail, but you're going to have a little more information, and next time, you're going to get ahead of the competition of people who are just sitting on their hands, doing their day jobs, and not experimenting with things. Outro. I just needed to include this picture. It is sick. This was a white elephant gift a few years ago, but I just love the picture too much. That's my cat, Elphaba. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm probably on YouTube somewhere, but it doesn't matter. And I just appreciate everybody's time. You can take pictures if you want, but thank you very much.
All right. Nicely done. I didn't realize this was Hobby Electronics Conf, and I couldn't be happier. This is amazing.
We're taking HTMX Conf back, people.
Yeah. So I want to hear a little bit about, you said in there, in my intro, I said you got into tech recently. You said in your short time in tech. I think there are people in here who are either career switchers or students. Like, what is your advice? Because this looks very intimidating. When you are on stage and you're talking about this and you're like, oh yeah, embedded Rust, easy peasy. What has your journey been, and what's your advice for people either trying to switch careers or get into the career based on your experience?
You got to start somewhere, and you need to pick one thing and get good at it. But again, you can't stop at that one thing, and it feels intimidating when you switch. Like, I started with JavaScript and I had to switch to Python because I got a job where I told them I knew how to do Python, and I didn't know how to do Python.
That's a good tip if you're listening.
But yeah, lie on your resume.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, if you stop and you accept that this is what I do, I'm a React engineer. I think when you're early on in your career, like I switched from video production, so I wasn't a programmer. I don't have a CS degree. I think early on in your career, you need to kind of cast wide nets. Okay. And that's difficult because then you have to learn a lot of things, and it's hard. But if you can do that, then you can kind of navigate different routes that wouldn't be available to other people.
So I also don't have a CS degree.
Sweet.
How did you, accounting, for anybody that's curious, very interesting, we can talk about it later. How did you get that first job? Was it project-based? Was it like, hey, look what I can do, look what I have done? Because that's always the hardest part.
It was two parts. So for one, I had just worked for like 6 months nonstop doing tech. Like 12 hours a day, I was writing stupid React projects and breaking things. And I got a job. It was my uncle hired me to make a website for him. Mm-hmm. And then the next time that I got a job, it was because I had worked with the CTO at a previous company, and he was impressed with what I had learned. And that's, I think, probably my best advice if you're trying to switch or if you're getting into this thing is like, networking is just as important as learning to code. Mm. And the people that you meet are going to be 100 times more valuable in the long term than any coding that you do. But it can't be one or the other. You have to be good, and you have to meet people, and you have to be like cool, and they have to like you, which can be hard for me sometimes. You can ask Aaron about it afterwards.
You're very cool. I really appreciate it. Y'all give it up
Thank you
for
very
Duncan.
much.